When the air grows heavy, it's not just your imagination, it's a presence. Clara inherited a beautiful mansion from her grandmother, but the house came with a tenant, a cold, hateful energy that doesn't just haunt the halls, it wants to wear her skin. This is the story of a possession and the unthinkable price to break the curse. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You step across the threshold of your new home, a place you inherited, a place filled with the memory of a loved one. You expect a sense of comfort, of nostalgia. But instead, what hits you is a wall of silence. Not a peaceful silence, but a thick, heavy and watchful one. It's a silence that feels like it's sucking the sound right out of the air. A vacuum where only the frantic beating of your own heart seems to echo. This is what Clara felt the moment she unlocked the ornate, heavy door to her grandmother's mansion. It wasn't a welcome, it was a warning, written in the very atmosphere she was now forced to breathe. This was no ordinary heaviness, no simple case of a dusty old house. The air itself was cold and dense, clinging to her skin like a film of damp decay. Every breath was a conscious effort, as if the house itself was resisting the intrusion of life into its stagnant depths. The grandeur of the high ceilings and the sprawling rooms, which should have felt majestic, instead felt like a gilded cage, each corner steeped in a shadow that seemed to pulse with a low, malevolent intelligence. The beauty of the architecture was a lie, a beautiful shell hiding a rotten, festering core. And then the silence began to break, but not with life. It broke with the subtle, impossible sounds that the rational mind desperately tries to explain away. A faint whisper from the top of the stairs when she knew she was utterly alone. The distinct, clear sound of a music box playing from a room she had already confirmed was empty, the melody twisted and slightly off-key. These weren't the gentle hauntings of a friendly ghost. These were probes. Tiny violations meant to test her sanity, to see how much she could endure before her reality began to crack. The nights were the true descent into hell. Sleep offered no refuge, only a darker, more vivid prison. Her dreams were not her own. They were invasions, visions of a past she never lived, of a face contorted in rage and sorrow, of cold hands dragging her down into the suffocating earth beneath the house. She would wake up gasping, the taste of soil and decay in her mouth, the feeling of those phantom fingers still burning on her ankles. Clara, a medium herself, knew with a terrifying certainty that this was far beyond a residual echo. This was a conscious, sentient, and deeply rancorous presence, and it had been waiting for her. Clara was no stranger to the spirit world, but this was a different kind of confrontation altogether. It was a war of attrition, fought in the quiet moments and the dark corners of her own home. The phenomena escalated from subtle whispers to violent, physical manifestations. She would walk into the grand library to find every single book pulled from its shelf and thrown onto the floor in a chaotic cascade of paper and leather. The portrait of her grandmother, once hanging serenely in the foyer, was found tilted at a grotesque angle every morning, the painted eyes seeming to follow Clara with a new, pleading desperation. The house was no longer just haunted. It was actively revolting against her presence, its anger becoming a tangible force that she had to push against with every step she took. Driven by a mixture of professional duty and sheer survival instinct, Clara began her investigation. She started not with the spectral, but with the historical, delving into the mansion's past that her family had always been so reluctant to speak about. Days were spent in the local archives and the dusty attic of the house itself, surrounded by crumbling letters, old land deeds, and faded photograph albums. The genteel history presented to the world was a thin veneer, and beneath it she began to uncover a pattern of tragedy, of sudden deaths, and of bitter, unresolved legal battles over the property that stretched back generations, each owner seemingly meeting a grim and untimely end. It was in a hidden compartment of an old writing desk that she found the first real clue, a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, written by her own great-grandmother, Eleanor. The script was elegant but frantic, the ink blotted in places as if by tears. The letters spoke of a shadow that walks the halls, of a coldness that clings to the soul, and of a man named Alistair, the original owner's disinherited and bitter brother. Eleanor's words described a growing terror, a feeling of being slowly consumed from the inside out, her own thoughts becoming muddled with a foreign, hateful rage. She wrote of a bargain that had to be made to keep the land, a terrible secret sin that had stained the foundation of the house itself. The pieces of the puzzle began to form a horrifying picture. Alistair, cheated out of his birthright, had not simply faded away. In his rage and despair, he had delved into forbidden occult practices, performing a ritual of binding that tethered his vengeful spirit to the very land the mansion was built upon. He was not a ghost passing through. He was the house. His consciousness was woven into the wallpaper, the floorboards, the very mortar between the bricks. His energy fed on the sorrow and fear of its inhabitants, growing stronger with each generation, his ultimate goal not merely to torment, but to find a vessel powerful enough to hold his essence and allow him to walk the earth once more. Clara now understood the true nature of the oppression she felt. The moving objects, the whispers, the nightmares, they were not the goal. They were the symptoms, the fever of a house sick with a parasitic soul. The heavy air was the weight of Alistair's century-old hatred, a spiritual poison that saturated everything. Armed with the terrible knowledge of Alistair's ritual, Clara's existence within the mansion transformed from an investigation into a siege. The presence, now fully aware that its secret was uncovered, shed all pretense of subtlety. The air grew so thick and cold that she could see her breath in great panicked plumes, even in the height of summer, a cold that seeped deep into her bones and seemed to freeze her from the inside out. And with her innate sensitivity as a medium, Clara realized with a cold, sinking dread that she was not just a target. She was the perfect candidate, the strongest vessel to have lived in the house in generations. The investigation was over. The hunt had begun. The whispers coalesced into a single, clear voice that spoke directly into her mind, a venomous stream of insults, threats, and ancient promises, twisting her memories and insecurities into weapons against her own psyche. The house was no longer trying to scare her away. It was actively trying to break her will, to make her pliable. The physical manifestations became intensely personal and violent. She would wake in the night to the sensation of invisible hands pressing down on her chest, stealing her breath, holding her in a paralyzing grip, while the dark silhouette of a man stood motionless at the foot of her bed. Objects didn't just move, they flew across the room with lethal intent, a vase shattering against the wall mere inches from her head. The reflections in the grand gilded mirrors were no longer her own. They would show a twisted version of herself, her eyes black and a cruel smirk on her face, a preview of the possession that was now terrifyingly imminent. Clara was fighting a war on two fronts, one against the entity in her environment and another against the entity invading her mind. Desperation led her to attempt a banishing ritual, a complex ceremony of light and will that she had used before to clear negative energies. She gathered her tools, drawing protective circles and chanting words of power, pouring all of her remaining strength into creating a sanctuary within the hellish home. For a brief, glorious moment, it seemed to work. The oppressive weight lifted, the cold receded, and the whispering voice faded into a distant, furious scream. A fragile hope bloomed in her chest, the first she had felt in weeks. She had dared to believe she could win. That hope was shattered with brutal finality. As the final word of the chant left her lips, every candle in the room was snuffed out at once, not by a draught, but by an unseen force that felt like a slap. The circle of salt on the floor erupted outward, as if from a small explosion. Then, a wave of pure, undiluted hatred threw her bodily across the room, her head cracking against the hard wooden floor. As she lay there, dazed and in pain, the voice returned, not as a whisper, but as a deafening roar inside her skull. It told her she was a fool, that his power was rooted in the land itself, bound by blood and a sacrifice older than she could comprehend. Her pathetic human rituals were nothing to him. He was not an intruder to be banished. He was the landlord, and she was living in his world. In the devastating aftermath of her failure, Clara hit her lowest point. The entity's victory was complete, and it began the final phase of its plan. A profound lethargy washed over her, a deep spiritual fatigue that made every movement a Herculean effort. She felt a second consciousness beginning to coil around her own, like a serpent constricting its prey. It started pushing at the edges of her will, inserting its own thoughts and impulses into her mind. The urge to speak words she didn't mean, to move her hand without her own command, to look at the world through a filter of his ancient bitterness. She was becoming a passenger in her own body, feeling the walls of her identity being systematically torn down, brick by brick, to make room for the rancorous soul of Alistair. At the very precipice of her own annihilation, clinging to the last shred of her dissolving self, Clara experienced a moment of terrifying clarity. It was not a thought, but a knowing, a final, desperate download of truth imparted by the house itself, or perhaps by the fading echo of her grandmother's protective love. She finally understood the full, monstrous nature of the bargain her ancestors had made. Alistair's ritual had not merely bound him to the land. It had created a parasitic cycle that required a specific, horrific fuel to sustain his power, the willing surrender of a bloodline descendant. He did not just want a vessel, he needed a soul to sacrifice its own autonomy, to break the final barrier, keeping him from true resurrection. A perverse act of self-immolation that would shatter the last spiritual lock. This was not a battle that could be won with force or traditional exorcism. To fight the entity directly was to feed it, to engage with the very hatred that constituted its being. The rituals, the defiance, the fear, it was all sustenance. The only way to break the cycle was to sever the connection at its source, to perform a spiritual jujitsu and use the entity's own immutable rules against it. The solution was not banishment, but a transmutation of the energy itself, and the instruction for this was seared into her mind with the simplicity of a fundamental law. The energy could only be transformed by a counter-energy of equal, absolute power. Not rage, but unconditional love. Not fear, but utter, selfless sacrifice. The plan that formed in her mind was so dreadful, so final, that what remained of Alistair's consciousness within her recoiled in a frenzy of renewed violence. He knew what she intended. Clara stopped resisting. She stopped feeding the entity with her fear. Instead, she began to consciously, deliberately gather every positive memory, every shred of love she had ever felt for her grandmother, for her family, for life itself. She focused on these feelings with the entirety of her being, building a fortress of light not around the house, but within her own soul, a final bastion against the consuming darkness. As the entity raged, trying to shatter her concentration with phantom pains and auditory hallucinations, Clara walked calmly to the heart of the house, the grand foyer beneath the tilted portrait. She stood there, not as a medium, not as a victim, but as a willing participant in a new ritual. She opened herself up completely, not to be possessed, but to accept the entirety of Alistair's bitter, centuries-old pain. She did not fight it as it flooded into her. She embraced it, allowing the sorrow, the betrayal, and the hatred to flow through her, and she met it not with resistance, but with a profound, boundless compassion. It was an excruciating psychic ordeal, a pain far beyond the physical, as if she was drinking an ocean of poison. In that ultimate moment of surrender, the impossible happened. The violent energy, met with no resistance and only absorbing love, began to falter. Its foundational hatred had no answer for this. The cycle of torment, which fed on fear and resistance, was broken. A brilliant, silent light erupted from Clara's form, not burning but cleansing. It filled the foyer, then the hallways, the rooms, seeping into the very foundations. The oppressive weight in the air dissolved, replaced by a profound, peaceful silence. The cold vanished. Clara collapsed to the floor, exhausted and hollowed out, but utterly, completely alone in her own mind for the first time since she had arrived. The house was finally truly silent. The curse was broken, but at a cost she was only beginning to comprehend. The silence that greeted Clara in the aftermath was a different entity altogether. It was not the heavy, watchful silence of before, but a deep, empty, and peaceful quiet, like the world holding its breath after a terrible storm. She lay on the cold marble of the foyer for a long time, her body trembling with a profound exhaustion that went far beyond the physical. It was the fatigue of a soul that had been stretched to its absolute limit, that had stared into the abyss of non-existence and had managed, by a thread, to step back. The victory was absolute, but it felt less like a triumph and more like a survival, a narrow escape from a fate worse than any physical death. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself up. The air was light, easy to breathe, and carried only the scent of old wood and dust, absent the clinging psychic decay that had poisoned it for so long. Sunlight, true and unfiltered by the spiritual gloom, streamed through the tall, dirty windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in a serene, ordinary ballet. She looked at the portrait of her grandmother, and for the first time it hung straight and true, the eyes in the painting now holding a gentle, distant sadness instead of desperate plea. The house felt like what it was, an old, empty building, its malignant heart finally stilled. In the days that followed, Clara moved through the mansion like a ghost herself, relearning the spaces that had been a prison of terror. The whispers were gone, the cold spots had vanished, the nightmares ceased. Yet, the cost of her victory was a permanent scar on her psyche. She felt a new kind of weight, the memory of Alistair's hatred and sorrow now a part of her, a dark library of emotion she had absorbed but not become. She had not destroyed the energy. She had transformed it through an act of ultimate spiritual alchemy, and in doing so, she had been fundamentally altered. She carried the silence of the house within her now, a solemn reminder of the price of peace. The story of the mansion on the hill and the medium who broke its curse is not one of a ghost hunter's glorious conquest. It is a far more somber and profound tale. It is a testament to the idea that some darknesses cannot be fought with light, but must be healed with a love so radical it borders on self-destruction. Clara's journey teaches us that the most powerful entities are not those that throw objects or speak in whispers, but those that feed on our own resistance, our own fear. And the only way to truly defeat them is to change the very nature of the battle, to meet absolute hatred with a sacrifice born of absolute love, a force so alien to the darkness that it cannot comprehend it, and thus cannot survive it. Clara never left the mansion. She stayed not as a prisoner but as a warden and a gardener, tending to the now clean energy of the place, ensuring the roots of the old curse would never again find purchase in this soil. The heavy air was gone, replaced by a gentle, sacred stillness. The cycle of torment was over, broken not by a sword, but by a surrendered heart, proving that sometimes the most unthinkable sacrifice is the only key to true freedom. If you felt the weight of this story, delve deeper into the shadows with us. Subscribe for more tales where energy speaks, and the line between our world and the next is terrifyingly thin. Don't forget to like and share your thoughts below.